The sky over Virex station shimmered like oil on water, its artificial atmosphere diffusing light in unsettling hues of green and violet. The summit's main forum, a vast amphitheater constructed of obsidian-like alloy, buzzed with the anxious murmurs of 37 species gathered under uneasy peace. Near the core dais, the human delegation stood politely apart, quiet and vastly outnumbered. They were unarmed, unarmored, unaugmented. Their lack of visual enhancements was almost scandalous. Alec Tur, Prime Strategos of the Zelvar Dominion, rose from his seat in a fluid movement, his ridged blue form towering as he stepped forward. The subharmonic thrum of his vocal sacs silenced the chamber. "Let us not pretend," Tur said, projecting his voice across the concentric tiers. "These humans, while culturally earnest, are fragile. Their bones snap under stress, their organs redundant and inefficient, their skins paper-thin. They lack the endurance of the Yakari, the precision of the Keln, or the regenerative adaptability of the Zurich." His gaze sharpened. "They bleed. A great deal." A polite chuckle from some delegates. Others remained unreadable. Earth's delegation, however, did not react. Tur flexed his six-fingered hand toward the assembly. "Thus, in the interests of clarity and honor, I issue a ceremonial challenge. A duel our champion against theirs. No death, of course, simply a demonstration, a clarification of position, if you will." Whispers ignited across the tiers. Challenges at summits were rare, usually political theater, rarely accepted. The human ambassador, Dana Keller, exhaled slowly. She turned to her team. Her eyes found one man leaning against the wall, arms crossed, looking vaguely like he hadn't slept properly in days. "James." He looked up. "I need you to do it." He pushed off the wall. I figured. He wasn't what anyone would call imposing. Lanky, wiry, yes, but no visible musculature. His right shoulder dipped slightly lower than the left, a sign of an old clavicle injury. When he walked, it was with a slight hitch in the left leg. Tur blinked. "This is your champion?" James rubbed the back of his neck. "Only one we brought who can handle a pressure differential above 2G for more than 4 minutes without vomiting." It wasn't a joke. Nobody laughed. James stepped into the ring. The Zelvar champion was already waiting, a grotesque monument to bioengineering. 8 feet tall, covered in plated musculature and dermal armor, the chamber's lighting cast symmetrical shadows over the jagged protrusions of his frame. His name was Kariax. His species record included 19 duels, 19 victories. A low drumbeat sounded. Ceremonial. James exhaled once, steady, then removed his jacket, revealing a compression suit beneath. No armor, no augmentation, just a thin, dark weave stretched over sinew and old scar tissue. He stepped forward, barefoot, the soles of his feet whispering across the arena surface. Kirksey snarled. "I will not maim, but I will educate." James nodded once. Same. Then motion. Carrick's lunged, blindingly fast for his size, and swung a downward elbow strike aimed to crumple James' clavicle. James pivoted, barely avoiding it, letting the force carry Kariax past him. He rotated behind the Zelvar's flank. Then, sharp, clinical, he struck the inner thigh, fingers ramming into the narrow junction between the vastus medialis and sartorius muscle. Kariax buckled slightly, a micro stutter in his stance. James didn't stop. He dropped low, sweeping the rear leg while his hand jabbed up, straight into the brachial plexus cluster beneath the creature's shoulder carapace. The nerve strike caused an immediate partial collapse of the Zelvar's arm. Kirksey roared and twisted, but James had already moved, calculating gait, weight shifts, limb trajectories with almost preternatural focus. Every movement was economical, brutal. He planted a knee into the joint fold of the Zelvar's left leg as Kirksey tried to rise. Ligaments buckled, a soft pop. The champion howled. And then, a final maneuver. James pivoted around to the Zelvar's back, wrapped his arm around the high cervical base of the neck, not in a choke, but in a controlled torque, and twisted slightly while bracing the lower spine with his hip. Not a break, but close. Kirksey's body stiffened and fell forward, hard, unmoving but breathing. 47 seconds had passed. Silence. Not stunned. Suffocating. The Keln ambassador leaned forward. Is the human enhanced? Dana Keller shook her head. Not even vaccinated against half your bacteria. James stood perfectly still, breathing shallow, eyes scanning. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the floor and sat down cross-legged, both hands gripping his right knee. Medical personnel from Earth jogged forward with scanners. Anterior cruciate is torn again, muttered one of them, already removing a brace from a med pack. I told you not to pivot off that leg, another said. Didn't have a choice. James winced as the brace locked into place with a mechanical hiss. He's got microfractures on the right fibula, deep tissue swelling in the left hip, and his intercostals are spasming. He should be in a stretcher. Later, James grunted. Let me sit for a second. Kirksey was being lifted onto a grav sled, his breathing erratic, his expression more confused than angry. The Zelvar Stratego stepped forward again. You are not normal. Dana crossed her arms. He's the only one who survived. The Strategos tilted his head. 7 duels, Dana said softly. All unsanctioned, all before the summit. We sent teams to test mutual compatibility for ceremonial combat standards. They didn't know it was lethal until it was too late. Every single time, James lost. Badly. James didn't look up. Each time, she continued, he studied the outcome. Nerve clusters, tendon structures, striking angles, oxygenation lag in Zelvar respiratory folds. He took every loss, every near-death injury, and turned it into data. She looked around the chamber. We didn't bring our best fighter. We brought the one who learned fastest. The assembly was silent. In the medical ward later, James lay shirtless on a gurney, while a dermal tech injected a coagulant along the bruised line of his ribs. A cardiologist scanned his heart rate rhythm on a transparent panel, muttering that it was way too stable for what he'd just pulled. A young alien from the observer delegation, a feathered Avirine, tiptoed in, eyes wide. Why didn't you show pain? It asked. James blinked, face pale and drenched in sweat. I did, just quietly. He nodded. You lost 7 times to being stronger than you. Why keep fighting? He exhaled. So the 8th time, I wouldn't. James woke to the sharp scent of antiseptic and the low murmur of overlapping alien dialects. Soft lights glowed above him, filtered through a gel-like material that mimicked natural daylight. His right knee throbbed with an ache he knew too well, dull and rhythmic, like a fist slowly closing and opening. The brace was still on, tighter now. Someone had adjusted it while he slept. Vitals steady, said a voice beside him. Human. Female. Ribs not collapsed, but it's inflamed. You're not getting off that table without a damn good reason. James turned his head slowly. Lieutenant Carla Givens stood next to his cot, flipping through a holographic chart, her fingers tapping measurements in midair. She wore medical fatigues, her hair tied back, and a universal scanner hung around her neck like a stethoscope from a different century. Anything torn that wasn't already torn? He asked, voice scratchy. A few intercostals you kindly reopened, micro tears in your left hamstring, and your hips still grinding from the blunt impact. Lungs are bruised, not punctured. You should not have been able to stand, much less fight. James shifted, slowly. The movement earned him a sharp glare from Carla. Don't test me, she said, pressing a hypo spray against his arm before he could argue. Localized anti-inflammatory. Won't make you feel good, just less bad. Good enough. He sat up with effort, hands braced on either side, sweat beading instantly across his brow. Even with support, his breath hitched halfway up his lungs. Carla didn't stop him, but she didn't help either. Ambassador Keller's coming down in 10, she said. Along with 3 species observers, they want to know what you are. I'm a guy with 2 herniated discs and a torn knee. Not what they mean. James ran a hand through his hair, noticing the bruises starting to creep up his arm in that familiar reddish-purple marbling. The Zelvar had hit harder than he expected, or maybe he'd braced too late. Either way, he wasn't walking without help today. Across Virex Station, in a sterile conference room designed to impress through symmetry and cold sterility, representatives of the Yakari Enclave, the Keln High Directive, and the Averine Cultural Assembly leaned forward in their seats. Their translator drones hovered quietly, processing layers of syntax and subtext. "I've reviewed the footage multiple times," said the Keln delegate, a thin figure with opaque scales that shifted hue slightly as it spoke. His strikes were impossibly targeted, as if he had access to internal schematics of the Zelvar. "He didn't," Ambassador Keller replied calmly. "Then he must have been coached by a Dominion traitor," the Yakari suggested. Oh. The Averine leaned in. He adjusted his stance mid-engagement based on the Zelvar's gait pattern. That level of observation is rare, especially under pressure. Keller nodded. James is not genetically modified. He's not a soldier by training. He's a former combat medic. He saw more of our last planetary conflict from inside makeshift surgical tents than from behind a rifle. Then explain how he won. Keller tapped the holo in front of her. A split screen showed grainy footage. One image showed a younger James being slammed into a wall by a tentacled species, another of him convulsing after a neural disruption blast, and yet another of him dragged off the dueling floor by medics. These were his first fights. Pre-summit, unofficial. We didn't plan to field champions, but the challenges came anyway. James volunteered. Every time, the Keln narrowed its eyes. He volunteered to lose? Aben volunteered to learn, and he almost died doing it. In the medical bay, James stood now, leaning heavily on a crutch. Not the high-tech kind, just a solid carbon fiber support. His leg was immobilized from thigh to shin. An elastic chest binder wrapped around his ribs, and every breath still made his back spasm in slow waves. He'd refused further sedation. If the aliens wanted to see him, they could see the cost. When the observers arrived, he greeted them with a nod, face blank. The Averine tilted its head. "You calculated the knee strike before contact?" "No, I remembered where I'd been hit the last time, then guessed which side was more vulnerable." "You guessed correctly." "Yeah, lucky me." The Kell's eyes narrowed. "You're minimizing your ability. Why?" James adjusted his grip on the crutch. "Because ability would imply this is normal, that what I did should be repeatable. It's not. You put me back in there tomorrow, I probably don't walk out." The room went still. "And yet you volunteered?" the Yakari murmured. James shrugged, the motion stiff and painful. "You mock fragility like it's weakness. But the thing about fragile things, we break. Then we fix ourselves, and when we fix ourselves enough times, we get good at not breaking the same way again." The Awaring looked fascinated. "You learn to fight by being defeated?" James gave a dry smile. "Isn't that how learning works?" Hours later, back in the human quarters, James lay on his side, eyes half-lidded while a medtech ran cryo-treatment over his swollen knee. The hum of the device was rhythmic, almost comforting. Dana Keller sat across from him, sipping a cup of synth tea, watching. "Are you sure you're okay with what we told them?" she asked. "Why wouldn't I be? You're being painted as a martyr, the man who survived just long enough to teach us how to win." James snorted, then winced. I didn't teach anyone anything. I just didn't want to see the next guy die the way I did." Still, she set the cup down. "They're afraid of you now. They shouldn't be. I'm just a man with good memory and bad knees." Keller stood, walked over, and gently touched his shoulder. "No, James, you're the man who changed how they think about us. That's not nothing." Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, in the Dominion's war chamber, Strigoshtari replayed the footage of Caraxi's collapse again and again. His aides stood in silence. For the first time in decades, the dominant warrior caste had been bested in front of the galaxy. Not by force, not by technology, but by a battered human who had dissected their physiology in less than a minute. "We will re-engineer the neural sheath pattern," muttered one biostrategist. "No," Tur said. "It is not the human's technique we fear. It is his failure." The others looked confused. Tur turned to the screen. "That man failed 7 times. That is more adaptation than we have trained for in a decade. If this is what humans become when they lose—" He trailed off. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Tur said, almost reluctantly, "We must revise our models. Strength may not be enough." The 3rd day after the duel, James tried walking without the crutch. It didn't go well. The moment his foot touched the deck without support, his right knee quivered, then buckled. Pain lanced up through his hip, stabbing across his back like an exposed nerve. He dropped to one knee, gasping, palms braced on the cool alloy floor. Sweat poured down his neck, and for a moment all he could hear was the hammering of his own heartbeat in his ears. Carla found him that way 5 minutes later, still on the ground, breath short, face pale. "You're an idiot," she muttered, looping her arm under his and hauling him up. He didn't argue. Back in the med bay, she rechecked the scans. Ligaments still inflamed. No new tearing, but the existing damage was far from healed. He needed at least 2 more weeks before even light walking was advisable. A full recovery would take months, 6, maybe more, if he didn't follow protocol. "You do this again," she warned, "and I'm sedating you into a medically induced coma." James lay back against the cot, eyes closed, jaw clenched. "I can't afford to look weak. You already fought through 6 injuries. You proved your point." "No, they think I'm something I'm not." Carla tilted her head. "And you think letting them see you crawl around is going to fix that?" He didn't answer, but the tightness in his expression said everything. Elsewhere, in a darkened observation chamber, the Averine scholar Jella Nevin replayed the duel from 6 separate angles. It had studied violence before, academically, ritualized, ceremonial, strategic, but this was different. There was no flourish in the human's movements, no display of superiority, just raw, mechanical precision executed through pain. Jella paused the video on a frame where James had twisted his body awkwardly to avoid a blow. The position placed enormous torque on his injured leg. Any other species would have collapsed, yet he moved through it, absorbed it. "Not invincible," Jella whispered, tapping a note into its translator slate, "but unpredictable, driven not by dominance, but by survival instinct, restructured as skill." By the 5th day, James could walk short distances with the crutch. Carla gave him clearance for light therapy, no weight-bearing stretches, minimal strain. Every step was still a risk, but he needed motion. Stillness made the ache worse. It was during one of these sessions, inside a low-gravity chamber adjusted to 0.4 Earth G, that an unexpected visitor arrived. Kerix. The former Zelvar champion stood just outside the chamber, one arm still in a regenerative sling, his movements slower now. A long scar ran down the side of his neck, a subtle reminder of where James had forced the lock on his cervical spine. James looked up, surprised. "I didn't expect you to drop by." Kerix stepped in, the doors hissing behind him. "I did not come to fight. I figured." Silence stretched between them as James balanced carefully on one leg, bracing against the wall. "I remember you from the test matches," Keriak said finally. "You weren't even ranked. Your technique was primitive. I crushed you." James gave a faint nod. "You broke 3 ribs and dislocated my shoulder. I remember that one." Kerix narrowed his eyes. "And yet you returned. You always returned." James sat down slowly, legs outstretched, breath tight. "Because no one else did." Kerix tilted his head. "Explain." James hesitated. Then, Earth's first 3 entrants to those unofficial duels didn't survive. One hemorrhage, another seized from a neural overload, the last suffocated in vacuum pressure simulation. We weren't ready. I wasn't either. But someone had to map out what we were up against. Someone had to be willing to lose enough times to learn. Carrick's looked at him, expression unreadable. "You shamed me," he said finally. James met his eyes. "I didn't want to. But I needed you to lose. Just once." Carrick stepped forward, extended his uninjured hand. "Then take this as an acknowledgement. Not of your strength, but of your refusal to die." James took the hand. They shook. That evening, the summit delegates reconvened for a private session, closed chamber, no media, just raw political recalibration. The Zelvar opened the floor with a new proposition. Instead of enforcing physical dominance protocols, they would support joint training initiatives cross-species, including human methodologies. Some whispered that it was strategic compromise. Others saw it as quiet retreat. James attended, seated in the rear, his leg propped up and bound tight. No one spoke to him directly, but many looked his way. Some nodded. A few flinched. Later, as the delegates filed out, a representative from the Corn Collective approached him, an insectile being with shimmering ocular plates and voice synthesized through a translator array. "Your body should not function under the duress it sustained. Our models mispredicted." James didn't look up. "That's becoming a theme." The Corn tapped its side panel, streaming telemetry. "Your combat analytics showed degraded form. Every movement cost energy. We assessed your collapse as imminent." James glanced sideways. "I didn't collapse." "No, you adapted, mid-degradation." A pause. "This is not a normal trait." James gave a tired smile. "It is for us." Back in the medical ward, Carla ran another scan. Swelling had gone down slightly. Ligaments still unstable. The bruises had yellowed around the edges, a sign of slow healing. "You need 3 more days before weight-bearing," she warned. "Give me 2. "No." "Carla." She turned, finally snapping. "James, I know what you're doing. You want them to see you up and walking so they'll stop thinking you're a machine. But pushing it now could tear what's left of your joint. And if that happens, you don't walk right ever again." He held her gaze. His was tired but steady. "They need to see that we heal too." Carla's voice softened. "Then let them see that later, when your body's not falling apart under the weight of symbolism." A long pause. Then James slowly lay back, resigned. "Right. Thank you. But after those 3 days," he said, "I'm standing for the closing ceremony." Carla didn't argue this time. That night, as James slept under dimmed lights and artificial gravity held steady at 0.8 Earth norm, Dana Keller sat outside the ward with the Keln ambassador. "We underestimated your people," the Keln admitted, wings folding flat against its back. Keller raised an eyebrow. "That's new. We thought your fragility meant you lacked capacity. We did not account for nonlinear adaptation, for behavioral resilience." Keller sipped her drink. "James didn't survive because he's better. He survived because we've spent all of human history learning from things trying to kill us." The Keln nodded. "That is not strength as we understand it, but it is terrifying nonetheless." Neither of them spoke for a long time after that. Inside the ward, James shifted in his sleep. His knee twitched once. His chest rose slow and ragged but steady. He was healing. Not quickly, not easily, but enough. The final day of the summit dawned with simulated sunrise, lighting the station's upper dome in hues of golden amber. It was artificial, of course, but no less symbolic. Delegates prepared for the ceremonial closure, where treaties would be signed and cultural acknowledgments exchanged. Every species would offer a gesture of peace song, data scroll, martial display, or genetic tribute. Earth's delegation, however, remained oddly quiet that morning. Inside the medbay, James sat at the edge of his cot, both feet planted on the floor. He wore a formal black uniform, no medals, no insignia. His brace was still in place beneath the trousers, bulked under the fabric. Standing still would be hard, walking worse. But he had decided. Carla stood across from him, arms folded. You know you've got swelling in your tibialis again, right? You can feel it grinding when you flex. James rolled his shoulders. I'll compensate. I swear, if your leg buckles during that walk, I'm going to sedate you and file it as an involuntary fainting episode. He looked up at her. I won't fall. Carla sighed, reached into her coat, and handed him a small pressure-controlled stim implant. If it locks, press this. It'll override the muscle signal and brace the joint for 5 seconds. That's it. Thanks. She paused. I mean it. 5 seconds. That's all you get. He nodded. Understood. Then he stood, slowly but unaided. And he walked. The central summit hall had been rearranged into a circular gallery. Flags and symbols of each species hovered in rotating hollow displays. Representatives filled the tiers, while cameras and sensor drones floated silently, recording every nuance. At the center, a platform waited, where each delegation would offer a final word. The Zelvar went first. Tur's voice was calmer now, his phrasing more careful. We have seen that fragility can be misleading, he said. It is not weakness, but variation. And in variation there is danger, but also potential. Other species followed, each delivering ritual acknowledgments. Most were predictable, diplomatic, safe. Some offered guarded praise of human resilience. A few admitted fascination. When it was Earth's turn, Dana Keller stepped forward. Behind her, with a subtle limp but upright, came James. A ripple moved through the assembly. No one had expected him to stand again, much less walk. Dana waited until the attention settled. We came to this summit as the youngest among you, she said, voice steady. Viewed as vulnerable, biologically limited, unprepared for the complexity of your politics and expectations. And you were right. We do break easily. Our bodies scar, our minds fracture, our emotions can be erratic. But what you misunderstood is that these cracks are not failures. They are how we evolve. She stepped aside, and James stepped up. He didn't speak at first. He looked around the chamber, slowly, taking in the faces, some wary, some curious, a few respectfully attentive. Then, I lost 7 times before I won once. I didn't win because I'm strong. I won because I remembered. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I learned how every species moved, how they fought, how they breathed under stress, where they tired first, where they didn't. Each injury taught me something new, and I survived not because I'm better, but because pain taught me faster than pride could. Another pause. He placed a small object on the platform. It was a fracture brace, his first one, used after the second duel. The gel padding had long since dried. The synthetic straps were still stained red-brown in spots. This is my offering, he said. Not a weapon, not a trophy, just a reminder that breaking is how we build. Then he stepped back and sat, slowly, carefully. Silence followed, long, deep. Then, for the first time in summit history, the Averine broke protocol. Their ambassador stepped forward unprompted, removed the ceremonial chain around their neck and offered it toward James. We traditionally pass this to those who survive our rites of fire, the ambassador said. None of your kind has passed them. You have, without even entering the fire. James blinked, unsure what to do. Dana accepted it on his behalf. In the days that followed, treaties were finalized. Joint training protocols between Earth and the Zelvar were formalized. Several species requested knowledge exchanges, especially regarding rehabilitation sciences and psychological resilience methods. Earth's medical delegation, particularly Carla, found themselves inundated with requests for lectures on nerve damage treatment, field surgery under atmospheric stress, and the psychological processing of pain through pattern recall. Carla eventually forced James to take an actual rest schedule, something close to a medical miracle. His leg remained in the brace, still weeks away from stable mobility, but the swelling had reduced, and the hematomas across his torso faded to blotchy yellows and greens. In quieter moments, James read the summit's public reaction reports. Some thought he was a fluke. Others believed him to be the first of a terrifying species-wide trend. But the most common phrase across the reports, translated into dozens of languages, was simple: "They do not break the same way twice." As Earth's delegation prepared to depart, James stood at the viewing panel, watching the stars slip past in the distance. His crutch rested beside him, unused for the moment, though still needed. Dana approached, arms folded. "You know, they offered to name a training compound after you." James groaned. "Don't let them, please. They're serious. I'd rather you named a medical wing." "We might." He glanced over. "Are you staying in the loop on that Yakari nerve modulation proposal?" "We are. Carla's already submitted revisions. They're reconsidering their baseline pain tolerance measures." He gave a tired laugh. "All because a medic refused to stay down." Dana nodded. "You changed how they see us," she said. "No," James replied. "I just reminded them that fragility isn't the opposite of strength. It's the cost of it." They stood in silence for a while. Then the ship drifted into departure position, and Earth's small delegation began its journey home, smaller in number than many, perhaps, but now far less underestimated. Somewhere behind them, deep within the summit's data archives, the footage of a bruised, limping man dismantling a super soldier with surgical precision continued to loop. Not as propaganda, not as legend, but as proof that humans learn, that humans adapt, and that even the most fragile among them can be the hardest to defeat.